The day had been exhausting. Olivia Brooks, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Pacific Division, finally allowed herself a rare moment of relief as she left her office. It wasn't often she could leave before nightfall, and tonight, Olivia decided to take the long way home. The scenic route might offer a brief reprieve from the constant weight of her position. As one of the most prominent black women in federal law enforcement, Olivia had shattered countless barriers. Her career was a testament to resilience and excellence, but even she needed moments to exhale. As the shimmering cityscape faded into the calm of suburban streets, Olivia pulled over in a quiet residential area to take a call from her deputy, Samuel Grant. It wasn't urgent, but Olivia's meticulous nature meant no task, no matter how small, lingered on her to-do list. She steered her sleek black sedan to the side of the road beneath a softly flickering street lamp. Habitually, she glanced at her watch, a reflex ingrained by years of strict scheduling. A few houses down the street, Officer Travis Denton sat in his patrol car, his eyes scanning the neighborhood with disinterest. Denton had developed a reputation, a white officer known for being heavy-handed, especially in predominantly black areas. When his gaze settled on Olivia's car, his lips curled slightly. The sight of a lone black woman in a well-off neighborhood triggered assumptions he didn't bother to question. Olivia, engrossed in her conversation, didn't notice the patrol car until the headlights flickered in her rearview mirror. As she wrapped up the call, she instinctively assessed her surroundings. Years of experience had honed her senses, making her hyper-aware of shifts in atmosphere. Denton's patrol car inched forward but didn't pass by. It lingered a few car lengths behind. Olivia exhaled quietly, already predicting how the next few minutes might unfold. The soft crunch of tires against pavement broke the silence as Denton's vehicle came to a stop directly behind hers. Olivia watched in the mirror as he stepped out, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. Calmly, she rolled down her window halfway, her hands resting visibly on the steering wheel. "License and registration," Denton barked. His tone was devoid of pleasantries, assertive in a way that made it clear this wasn't about traffic enforcement. This was about power. "Good evening, officer," Olivia responded, keeping her voice even. "Is there a reason I'm being stopped?" "You're blocking traffic," Denton said flatly, shining the beam of his flashlight directly at her face. "No parking in this zone." Olivia lifted an eyebrow, her eyes flicking toward the curb. There was no sign indicating such a restriction. Still, she knew better than to engage in unnecessary confrontation. Carefully, she reached into her glove compartment, moving deliberately as she retrieved her registration. "I believe I'm legally parked," Olivia replied, handing him the documents along with her license. Her voice was steady, but a quiet tension lingered beneath her composed exterior. Denton barely glanced at the papers. Instead, he stepped back and began circling her car, his eyes sweeping over it with exaggerated scrutiny. "What brings you to this neighborhood?" he asked, ignoring her earlier response. His gaze lingered on her sharply tailored suit and professional heels, attire that contradicted whatever image he'd initially conjured. "I was taking a call before heading home," Olivia said simply. "Is that a crime?" Denton smirked, angling his flashlight toward the interior of her car. "Seems suspicious," he muttered. "Why don't you step out for me?" Olivia hesitated for half a second. She knew the law. There was no legitimate reason for this request. Still, she recognized the potential fallout of refusal. With a calm breath, she unlocked the door and stepped out, her measured movements intentional. Her posture was poised, unshaken, but as Denton's eyes scanned her up and down, she could see the flicker of confusion cross his face. He hadn't expected her confidence or the air of authority that followed her like a shadow. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered, though less sure of himself now. Olivia raised her hand slightly, keeping her expression neutral. "Officer, may I ask again why I'm being stopped?" "I don't like your attitude," Officer Denton snapped, his grip tightening on his flashlight. "I asked the questions, not you." The tension was thick enough to cut. A few curious faces peered out from behind their curtains, drawn by the escalating scene beneath the flickering street lamp. Denton, emboldened by the perceived power imbalance, took a step closer. "What's in the trunk?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. "Got anything you shouldn't have?" Olivia Brooks felt her patience strain. Still, she held firm. Years of navigating high-stakes situations had taught her the value of restraint. "I assure you, there's nothing illegal in my car," Olivia replied, keeping her voice level. "However, if you feel the need to search, I'd like to request a warrant." Denton scoffed, shaking his head dismissively. "You don't make the rules here." Before Olivia could respond, headlights appeared from up the street. A slow-moving car crept past, its occupants visibly watching. Through the window, Olivia caught the glint of a phone held up, recording. For a fleeting moment, the presence of witnesses gave her a small sense of reassurance. It wouldn't erase the injustice of the situation, but it shifted the balance slightly in her favor. Denton noticed the bystanders, his scowl deepening. His grip on authority wavered as frustration prickled beneath his skin. He took a step back, jerking his head toward the sidewalk. "Step over there," he barked. Olivia complied, moving deliberately to avoid any hint of resistance. She stood beneath the street lamp, calm but unyielding, as Denton circled her car like a predator eyeing prey. She could feel his gaze, probing for cracks, some justification to escalate further. Olivia held her ground, biting the inside of her cheek to remind herself that this was not just about her. This was for every person who lacked the platform to fight back. "Stay put," Denton ordered as he returned to his patrol car. From the front seat, he ran her information. Olivia could see his silhouette against the glare of the computer screen, taking longer than necessary. The night air felt heavier, but Olivia used the quiet to steady herself. Her mind raced ahead, already calculating her next move. She had navigated systems far more intricate than Denton could comprehend. If he thought this encounter would end here, he was mistaken. Finally, Denton returned, his face blank as he handed her papers back. "You're free to go," he said through gritted teeth. "Next time, park where you're supposed to." Olivia met his eyes, her expression unreadable as she took her documents. "Thank you, officer. Have a good night." Her steps were calm as she slid back into the driver's seat. But as Olivia's car pulled away, her knuckles whitened against the steering wheel. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Sleep evaded her that night. Olivia lay awake, replaying every detail of the encounter with Denton. The humiliation gnawed at her. It wasn't the first time she had faced discrimination in uniform, but something about this incident struck deeper. Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her, not as a fellow officer or public servant, but as an outsider who didn't belong. By morning, Olivia had traded anger for clarity. She pulled her phone from the nightstand and dialed Samuel Grant. His voice was familiar, steady. He'd been her right hand at the bureau for years. "Morning, Director," Samuel answered, concern bleeding through the line. "You're calling early. What's going on?" "I had a run-in last night," Olivia said plainly. "Patrol Officer Travis Denton." A pause, then a sigh. "I know him by reputation. Aggressive with traffic stops, especially in places he thinks people don't belong." "I thought so," Olivia murmured. "I'm not letting this slide, Samuel. No personal vendettas, but this feels bigger than just him. I'm filing a complaint today, but I want to dig deeper. I have a feeling this wasn't an isolated incident." "I'm with you," Samuel replied without hesitation. "Just tell me how to help." Later that morning, Olivia strode into the precinct where Denton was stationed. Her presence commanded attention. A black woman in a crisp navy suit, her every step echoing confidence. She didn't introduce herself as the FBI's Pacific Division Director. That could wait. "Good morning." Olivia greeted the officer at the front desk, sliding a folder forward. "I'm here to file a formal complaint. It's regarding Officer Travis Denton." The officer hesitated, his eyes darting between Olivia's professional poise and the folder she placed on the desk. "I'll notify someone right away," he said, vanishing into the back. Olivia folded her hands, waiting patiently. This wasn't about making a scene, not yet. "You've pulled me over. May I ask why?" Olivia's voice remained calm, but Officer Denton's eyes narrowed. "I don't like your tone," Denton snapped. "I ask the questions, not you." The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Across the street, a curtain shifted slightly as a resident peeked through their window. Another neighbor watched from their porch, their phone raised, discreetly recording. Denton, emboldened by the attention, stepped closer. "What's in the trunk? Got anything I should know about?" Olivia's patience thinned, but she held her composure. She'd been in tighter corners before. "There's nothing illegal in my car, officer," she replied steadily. "If you feel the need to search it, I'd prefer you obtain a warrant." Denton scoffed. "You don't make demands here." Before Olivia could respond, another vehicle cruised by, the driver slowing enough to observe. A passenger held their phone up, recording the scene from the passenger window. The silent witnesses didn't ease the heat of Olivia's anger, but they grounded her. She wasn't just standing there for herself. She stood for everyone who lacked the voice or position to push back. Denton's eyes flicked to the passing car, his expression tightening. "Step to the sidewalk," he ordered brusquely, gesturing with his flashlight. Olivia complied, her movements deliberate. She stood beneath the soft glow of the street lamp as Denton paced around her sedan, his eyes hawk-like, searching for anything he could use to escalate further. She could feel his gaze linger, probing for cracks. Olivia bit the inside of her cheek, her nails pressing lightly into her palm to stay calm. This wasn't about winning a battle. It was about keeping control. "Stay put." Denton retreated to his patrol car, sliding into the driver's seat as he ran her information. Olivia waited, her heartbeat steady but her mind racing ahead. She considered the avenues this encounter could take and the steps she would follow, no matter Denton's next move. Minutes passed before Denton returned. His expression was stony, unreadable. "You're free to go," he muttered, handing her documents back with evident reluctance. "Next time, don't park where you're not supposed to." Olivia accepted the papers with a polite nod. "Thank you, officer. Have a good evening." She returned to her car, her posture unshaken, but as she pulled away, her grip on the steering wheel tightened until her knuckles whitened. This wasn't over. By the time Olivia parked in front of her townhouse, the quiet neighborhood seemed distant. The encounter replayed in her mind on a loop. She'd faced discrimination before, but tonight felt different, more invasive, more personal. As the director of the FBI's Pacific Division, Olivia Brooks understood the justice system intimately. Yet moments like this reminded her how prejudice often found comfort within the folds of authority. The following morning, Olivia sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee in the soft morning light. She'd thought long into the night about how to proceed. Anger, while warranted, wasn't a tool. Action was. She pulled out her phone and dialed the one person she trusted with this. "Morning, Olivia." Nathan Green's voice was warm, though his curiosity peeked through. Nathan was Olivia's closest colleague, a senior FBI investigator with years of fieldwork under his belt. "You don't usually call this early. What's going on?" "I had a run-in last night." Olivia's tone was clipped but even. "With a patrol officer. Name's Travis Denton. Pulled me over, no cause. Tried to escalate things in front of witnesses." Nathan exhaled slowly. "I know of him. Denton's got a reputation. Excessive force, profiling, especially in neighborhoods where he thinks certain people don't belong." "I thought so." Olivia's eyes narrowed at the memory. "I'm filing a formal complaint, but I want to dig deeper. Something about him feels too practiced, too familiar. This isn't isolated." "You're thinking bigger?" Nathan's voice shifted. The casual tone faded, replaced by the sharpness of an agent ready to move. "I am. No vendettas, Nathan, just facts. But I want his record pulled and scrubbed clean. If there's a pattern, I'll find it." Nathan didn't hesitate. "I'm in. Send me what you've got, and I'll start sifting through his case files." Later that morning, Olivia arrived at the precinct where Denton was stationed. She wore another immaculate tailored suit, subtle but unmistakable authority wrapped around her like armor. For now, Olivia kept her title out of the conversation. She wasn't there to make waves, at least not yet. The precinct buzzed with the usual commotion. Phones ringing, papers shuffling, and officers moving briskly from desk to desk. Olivia Brooks stepped inside, her heels clicking against the worn tile floor as she approached the front desk. A young officer looked up, his eyes flickering with curiosity. "Good morning," Olivia greeted with calm professionalism. "I'm here to file a formal complaint against Officer Travis Denton." The officer's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Olivia noticed. There was hesitation, uncertainty. "Let me get someone to assist you," he said quickly, vanishing into the back. Minutes later, a broad-shouldered man emerged from an adjoining office. His badge identified him as Sergeant Brian Hale. His stride was measured, his handshake firm but guarded. "Miss Brooks, I'm Sergeant Hale. I understand you're here to file a complaint?" That's correct. Olivia met his gaze, unwavering, as she handed over the neatly organized file she'd prepared the night before. It contained a detailed account of the incident with Denton, including references to potential legal breaches. Sergeant Hale thumbed through the pages, his brow furrowing slightly. "We take these matters seriously, Miss Brooks," he said with rehearsed formality. "I assure you this will be reviewed thoroughly." Olivia nodded, though she recognized the tone, polite, procedural, but distant. She had heard this song and dance before. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'll be following up." As she exited the precinct, Olivia's thoughts churned. Filing the complaint was only the surface-level play. Real accountability required more than forms and promises. She needed hard evidence, and for that, she would need Nathan Green. That afternoon, Olivia met Nathan at a quiet corner cafe. Laptops open, the pair sifted through the beginnings of what promised to be a disturbing investigation. Nathan's face darkened as he scrolled through the files he had pulled together. "Look at this," Nathan said, angling his screen toward Olivia. Denton's had multiple complaints filed against him. Racial profiling, excessive force, intimidation, but not a single one stuck. Every investigation? Cleared. Olivia leaned in, her eyes scanning the records. "Convenient," she murmured, a sharp edge to her voice. Nathan nodded grimly. "It gets worse. I pulled his financials. There's a discrepancy between his reported salary and his spending habits. Not glaring, but enough to raise flags." "Side deals? Bribes?" Olivia's eyes narrowed. "It's worth investigating. Let's start piecing together his network. Any connections, partners, or patterns in his stops. If there's a web here, I want to untangle it." The two agents worked methodically, connecting the dots. A troubling pattern emerged. Denton consistently targeted minorities in wealthier neighborhoods. His stop reports were vague, loaded with ambiguous language that justified detainment without cause. Hours passed, but Olivia's sense of urgency grew. "This isn't just Denton," she said finally. "This feels systemic. If his record's clean despite the complaints, someone's covering for him. We're not just dealing with one rogue officer." Nathan sat back, arms crossed. "You're right, and if that's the case, the precinct's complicit. But how do you expose that?" Olivia's fingers drummed softly against the cafe table as an idea took shape. "We need to go deeper. Filing this complaint won't cut it. Denton's protected. If we're going to catch him, we need evidence that's indisputable." Nathan arched an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "A sting," Olivia said, leaning forward. "We create a scenario that forces his hand, makes him reveal exactly who he is." Nathan hesitated. "Risky, and if Denton catches wind of it, he'll cover his tracks faster than we can move. That's why we need airtight planning, a perfect cover story." Olivia's eyes held a flicker of determination. Nathan exhaled slowly but nodded. "I'll start sketching out the framework, but we'll need someone Denton's already profiled, a credible target who's willing to step in." "I know just the person," Olivia replied. Over the next several days, Olivia and Nathan meticulously laid the groundwork. They analyzed Denton's patrol routes, identifying areas where he routinely conducted questionable stops. A key player emerged, Jamal Rivers, a delivery driver who had filed multiple complaints against Denton in the past. Jamal had faced profiling firsthand and didn't hesitate when Olivia approached him. "If this helps bring him down, I'm in," Jamal said firmly. Meanwhile, Olivia followed up with Sergeant Hale regarding her complaint. Each time, his responses felt intentionally vague, his updates sparse. "They're dragging their feet," Olivia told Nathan one evening over the phone. "Of course they are. They think it'll fade away." "It won't," Olivia said, her tone resolute. Later that night, as Olivia sifted through her latest findings, her phone buzzed. Nathan's voice greeted her. "I've got something," he said. Nathan's voice was low but urgent over the phone. "I've been tracking Denton's movements. He's been meeting off the record with a small group of officers. No official reports, just casual get-togethers at a diner. One of our informants overheard them talking quotas and targeting certain neighborhoods." Olivia Brooks felt her pulse quicken. This was the break she needed. "That's exactly what we need to pin him," she said, leaning forward at her desk. "Let's zero in on those meetings. If we can get audio or video proof, it could change everything." As she hung up, Olivia couldn't shake the memory of Denton's smug expression during their traffic stop. This wasn't about him alone anymore. It was about the community he preyed on and the systemic failures that allowed officers like him to thrive. Her position gave her the leverage to make a difference, but justice required more than authority. It demanded persistence, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. And Olivia Brooks wasn't backing down. The air was thick with anticipation as Olivia and Nathan finalized their preparations for the sting operation. Every detail had been meticulously crafted, but Olivia carried the weight of what was to come. This wasn't just about Denton. It was about dismantling the system that let him operate unchecked. The plan was simple, but risky. Denton's patrol route stretched across a well-known road, notorious for baseless stops involving black drivers. They would bait him, force him to reveal his true colors, and capture every second on hidden cameras and microphones. Nathan coordinated with their informant, Jamal Rivers, the delivery driver who had previously volunteered to help. Jamal had crossed paths with Denton before and was more than willing to step up. Driving his old, dented Toyota, Jamal was instructed to stick strictly to traffic laws while traveling down Denton's usual patrol stretch. Olivia and Nathan would monitor the entire operation from an unmarked van nearby, watching live feeds from the hidden cameras inside Jamal's car. As evening fell, the van hummed quietly, parked just out of sight. Nathan adjusted his earpiece, his eyes glued to the small screen, streaming the live footage. "You think he'll bite?" Nathan asked, his tone low but tense. Olivia's gaze was fixed, her expression unflinching. "If Denton's consistent, he won't be able to resist." It didn't take long. On the screen, Denton's patrol car appeared, tailing Jamal's vehicle with unsettling precision. The officer's predatory focus locked onto the worn sedan ahead of him. "Here we go," Olivia murmured, leaning forward. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the console as the flashing red and blue lights flickered to life. Jamal obediently pulled over. Denton swaggered toward the driver's side, flashlight in hand, his posture dripping with the same arrogance Olivia had experienced firsthand. "License and registration," Denton snapped, his tone sharp and uninviting. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he handed over his documents, but his voice remained steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" Denton barely glanced at the paperwork. His eyes darted suspiciously around the car's interior. "You tell me," he said coldly. "This car's seen better days. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Jamal kept his composure. "Making a delivery," he answered, gesturing to his uniform. "Is something wrong with my driving?" Denton's flashlight hovered over the back seat. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. In the van, Nathan cursed under his breath. "He's escalating." Olivia's jaw tightened. She couldn't intervene. Not yet. "Stay calm, Jamal," she whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. Jamal stepped out slowly, keeping his hands visible. Denton's inspection began, his flashlight flicking through the car's interior before he moved to the trunk without consent. Every movement, every unnecessary action was captured on camera. "What's in the trunk?" Denton demanded. Jamal hesitated, though his tone remained polite. "Just delivery packages, sir. You're welcome to check, but I'd prefer if we followed protocol." Denton's lip curled. "Protocol?" he sneered, stepping closer. "You don't get to decide that." Denton's eyes narrowed as Jamal calmly mentioned protocol. "Proper protocol?" Denton repeated with mocking irritation. "You telling me how to do my job now?" In the surveillance van, Nathan Green's fists clenched at his sides. "He's baiting him," Nathan muttered, his jaw tight. Olivia Brooks nodded grimly, eyes locked on the screen. "And we're catching every second of it." Ignoring Jamal's clear objection, Denton popped the trunk without consent, his hands rifling carelessly through the delivery boxes. Packages shifted and tumbled as Denton deliberately disrupted the contents. Finally, Denton slammed the trunk shut, stepping back with a smirk. "Looks like you're clean this time," he said smugly, "but I'll be keeping an eye on you." Jamal's composure held until the very end. As he retrieved his documents, his voice trembled faintly with frustration. "I haven't done anything wrong, officer. You've made that clear yourself." Denton's smile flickered, replaced by a flash of anger. He stepped closer, his shadow cutting across Jamal. "Watch your tone," Denton warned. "I can make your life a whole lot harder if I feel like it." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. But Jamal held his ground, his steady gaze meeting Denton's, despite the intimidation. After a long, tense pause, Denton turned and strode back to his patrol car. Jamal watched as the officer's taillights disappeared down the street before climbing into his own vehicle. His hands shook as they gripped the steering wheel. In the surveillance van, Olivia and Nathan exhaled almost simultaneously. "We got it," Nathan said, his voice laced with relief and lingering anger. "Every second of that is solid." Olivia nodded, already piecing together the next steps in her mind. "This is just the beginning. We need to connect this to Denton's wider pattern of misconduct. He's not operating in isolation." The next morning, Olivia and Nathan stood before a briefing room filled with FBI agents. Screens around the room displayed the clearest moments from the sting operation. Denton's illegal search, his aggressive tone, and the thinly veiled threats he made toward Jamal. Nathan toggled through additional files as Olivia took her place at the head of the table. "We've been compiling evidence," Nathan said, pulling up a diagram connecting Denton to other officers. "His record doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Denton's lifestyle doesn't match his official salary. Luxury vehicles, frequent vacations, and even a second property registered to his brother-in-law." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "And the money?" Nathan nodded, tapping the screen. "Small but consistent cash deposits, just under the reporting limit. It's not just bribes, it's a pattern. Denton's part of something bigger." "This confirms our suspicions," Olivia said, crossing her arms. "Denton isn't just a rogue officer. There's a network at play here." That afternoon, Olivia returned to the precinct. This time, she didn't request a polite audience. Sergeant Brian Hale's eyes flickered with unease as she entered his office, her presence commanding. "Miss Brooks?" Hale greeted stiffly. "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." Olivia placed a thick folder of documents on his desk with deliberate force. "We need to talk, Sergeant," Olivia said, her tone calm but cutting, "about Officer Travis Denton." Hale's jaw tightened, but he maintained his professional facade. "I already told you. This isn't about my complaint," Olivia interrupted, sliding the folder toward him. "This is about systemic misconduct in your department. Denton isn't an outlier. He's a symptom." Hale opened the folder, his eyes scanning the photos, reports, and transcripts. As the weight of the evidence sank in, his face paled. "This," Hale's voice trailed off, "it's serious," Olivia finished for him, "and it's not going away. I suggest you cooperate fully because federal oversight is next." Hale closed the folder with shaking hands, but Olivia could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He wasn't just worried about Denton, he was worried about who else this could lead to. As Olivia stepped out of the precinct, the burden she carried felt marginally lighter. The evidence was undeniable, and the wheels of justice had finally started to turn. But Olivia knew this wasn't over. Denton, Hale, and anyone else tangled in this web wouldn't go down quietly. The fight ahead would be long, exhausting, and full of resistance. Still, Olivia Brooks had no intention of backing down. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for Jamal, for the countless others who had been targeted, humiliated, and silenced. And that was a fight worth every ounce of effort. Olivia Brooks leaned forward, eyes narrowing as Nathan Green pulled up transaction records. "The source of the extra income?" Olivia asked, scanning the figures. "We've traced several payments to a real estate developer," Nathan replied, adjusting the files on his screen. "His name is Eric Calloway. Calloway's tied directly to Denton and a few others at the precinct. It looks like they've been receiving cash to pressure residents out of certain neighborhoods." Olivia's stomach turned. "Gentrification through intimidation," she muttered. "They're using their badges to drive people out." Nathan nodded grimly. "Exactly. We've connected Denton to at least 3 incidents. Black families harassed, cited for small infractions, or outright arrested. Eventually they left, and within months, those properties were bought by Calloway." Olivia's hand curled into a fist. It was worse than she'd expected. What about the internal complaints? Were they deliberately buried? Nathan's expression darkened. "Most of them never got past Denton's supervisor, Sergeant Brian Hale. Hale signed off on every single one, clearing Denton every time." Olivia's jaw tightened. Hale's either complicit or deliberately looking away. She exhaled slowly, knowing they couldn't tackle this alone. The corruption was too deep. That afternoon, Olivia made a call she had hoped to avoid, one to Dana Caldwell, an assistant U.S. attorney she trusted implicitly. Dana was sharp, relentless, and had a track record of handling sensitive cases with the kind of discretion Olivia needed. Olivia Brooks, Dana's familiar voice greeted her. It's been a while. What's going on? I need your help, Olivia said, wasting no time. She detailed the sting operation, the financial connections to Calloway, and the systemic corruption within the precinct. Dana's tone grew serious. Olivia, this isn't small. If what you're saying is true, we're not just dealing with a bad cop. This implicates the entire precinct and beyond. Exactly, Olivia replied. But we need to be careful. If anyone catches wind of this before we're ready, they'll bury everything. Dana paused for a moment, then answered firmly. Send me the files. I'll review them tonight and assemble a team. With the U.S. Attorney's Office on board, Olivia felt the first pieces falling into place. Later that evening, Olivia and Nathan decided to confront Sergeant Hale directly. There was no warning, no polite request. The moment they entered the precinct, heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire as Hale stepped out of his office to greet them. Director Brooks, Agent Green, Hale said, keeping his expression neutral. To what do I owe the pleasure? Olivia placed a thick folder on his desk and took a seat. Sergeant Hale, we've uncovered evidence of widespread corruption within your precinct, Olivia began, her tone cool but unwavering. Denton's at the center of it, but he's not alone. Hale's face remained impassive, but Olivia caught the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. I don't know what you're implying, Hale replied carefully, but I can assure you. This isn't about complaints, Nathan interrupted, sliding a series of printed records across the desk. This is about systemic abuse, racial profiling, illegal searches, and financial kickbacks, and we have enough evidence to suggest you've been signing off on all of it. Hale's calm facade cracked. His eyes shifted between them as if searching for an escape. Hold on. Are you accusing me? We're giving you a chance, Olivia said, cutting him off. Help us dismantle this or watch the entire precinct crumble. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Hale sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair, his shoulders sinking. What do you need? He asked, his voice low. With Hale reluctantly cooperating, Olivia and Nathan gained access to internal files the precinct had buried for years. What they found was even worse than anticipated. Denton wasn't just operating under the radar, he was leading a small network of officers who targeted vulnerable communities with impunity. Reports were doctored, charges were fabricated. Families were driven from their homes, and every step benefited Calloway's real estate development projects. One case in particular struck Olivia, the Daniels family. For over a year, the Daniels had been harassed by Denton and his unit. Multiple infractions, noise complaints, and traffic stops, none of which held legal weight. Eventually, they moved out. Their home was sold within 2 months to one of Calloway's holding companies. The details mirrored Jamal Rivers' experience. Olivia's determination flared anew. These families were driven out of their homes by the very people sworn to protect them, she said, scanning the file. Nathan nodded. We're not letting this slide. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. Denton wasn't an isolated problem. He was part of a machine, one built to profit from fear and displacement. And Olivia Brooks was ready to tear it down. Nathan Green leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing as the audio file played. The recording was unmistakable. Travis Denton's voice, calm and cold, discussing payments and strategies with real estate developer Eric Calloway. The conversation laid out in explicit detail how they planned to drive residents out of their neighborhoods. 2 more families aren't budging, Denton said. They'll crack after 1 or 2 more stops. Make their lives difficult. Tickets, noise complaints, whatever it takes. Calloway, you'll have the properties by the end of the month. Nathan hit pause, glancing at Olivia Brooks. That's it, he said. This is our smoking gun. Olivia didn't speak right away. She sat back in her chair, letting the weight of the evidence sink in. With this, Olivia finally said, we're ready for the next phase. We catch them in the act. Denton, Calloway, and anyone else tied to this racket. Nathan nodded. We'll need to set up another sting, but this time, we go bigger. Calloway won't just sit back and let this unfold. He's hands-on. Olivia pushed the file across the table, watching Nathan's eyes flicker over the details. Let's bring Dana Caldwell in. I want the U.S. Attorney's Office involved from the start. Late into the night, Olivia, Nathan, and Dana gathered in a secured conference room, mapping out every angle of the operation. This has to be airtight, Olivia said firmly, tracing routes and surveillance zones on the large table map. Denton's smart, but Calloway? He's meticulous. If we give them even a hint that we're watching, they'll bury the operation before we can make a move. Dana tapped a pen against the table. This isn't just about justice for the victims, she said. If we pull this off, it sets a precedent. We can't let precincts use the law as a weapon for profit. As the meeting wrapped up, Olivia lingered behind, staring at the map. Anticipation hummed in her chest, but so did the anxiety of what lay ahead. The stakes were high. One mistake could unravel months of work. The following morning, Nathan arrived with another file in hand, laying it flat on the table. I kept digging, he said. Denton's not working alone. 4 other officers are tied to this operation, and Calloway, he's bankrolling all of it. Olivia's eyes scanned the chart Nathan spread out, a web of names, dates, and financial transfers. At the center was Denton, with Calloway's name branching off alongside 4 others. They've been systematically targeting minority communities, Nathan continued. Bogus citations, harassment, arrests under thin pretenses. Within weeks, the properties are in Calloway's hands, flipped and sold at massive profits. Olivia's lips pressed into a thin line. Gentrification by force. They aren't just bending the law, Nathan added. They're using it as a tool to destroy lives. As Nathan flipped through a series of emails between Denton and Calloway, one email stood out, a simple message from Calloway detailing a meeting at a local diner. It was scheduled for that Friday. Calloway and Denton are meeting to discuss the next steps, Nathan said. If we intercept this, we catch them red-handed. Olivia didn't hesitate. We'll monitor it. I want the entire diner wired. On the day of the sting, the operation hummed like clockwork. Olivia, Nathan, and Dana were stationed nearby, watching as the live feed from hidden cameras streamed to their laptops. Inside the diner, Denton arrived first, casually sliding into a booth in the back. A few minutes later, Calloway followed, his tailored suit standing out against the modest surroundings. The conversation began harmlessly enough, small talk and pleasantries. But it didn't take long for the conversation to shift. I want those houses emptied by the end of the month, Calloway said, sipping his coffee. The investors are getting restless, Denton nodded. We'll start with the Harris family. Same play as last time, parking citations, late-night disturbances. In the surveillance van, Nathan clenched his fists. Unbelievable. They're treating this like business as usual. Let them keep talking, Olivia murmured, her eyes glued to the screen. As Calloway leaned in, lowering his voice, the microphone picked up every word. If the Harrises don't break, we'll get creative, Calloway said. I'm not losing that property. By the end of the meeting, Olivia gave the order. Uniformed officers approached the diner's exits, just as Denton and Calloway rose from their booth. Travis Denton, Eric Calloway, one officer called out, flashing his badge. You're under arrest for conspiracy, harassment, and abuse of power. Calloway's smug expression faltered for the first time. You can't be serious, Calloway scoffed, raising his hands slowly. You have nothing on me. Nathan stepped forward, holding up his phone. Oh, we have plenty, he said, playing back a snippet of the audio recording. As Denton and Calloway were led to the waiting patrol cars, Olivia caught Denton's glare. This isn't over, he hissed, but Olivia smiled coolly. No, Officer Denton, it's just beginning. If they suspect we're watching, they'll shut down immediately, Olivia Brooks said, eyes narrowing as she and Nathan Green mapped out the final details of the sting operation. Nathan nodded. We'll use undercover agents inside the diner. They'll monitor the conversation up close and signal if anything shifts. I've got the tech team planting hidden cameras and mics now. Good, Olivia replied. Let's make sure there are no loose ends. I want backup units on standby, ready to move the second we have enough. Nathan's eyes glinted with quiet determination. Already arranged, we'll be ready. By nightfall, the stage was set. Olivia and Nathan sat in the back of an unmarked van parked discreetly near Westford Diner, where Travis Denton and Eric Calloway were scheduled to meet. Inside, 2 undercover agents posed as regular customers, blending effortlessly with the small evening crowd. Eyes on, Nathan whispered, his gaze locked on the screen displaying the live camera feed. Denton was the first to arrive, his familiar smirk plastered across his face as he slid into a corner booth. Minutes later, Calloway entered, his designer suit contrasting sharply with the modest surroundings. His presence exuded the quiet arrogance of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. "They're getting started," Nathan said quietly. Denton and Calloway exchanged a firm handshake before settling into their seats. "Here we go," Nathan murmured as their conversation began. From the start, the dialogue was incriminating. Denton leaned back casually, his tone light but unmistakable. "That family on Maple Drive? They're holding out, but a couple more stops should push them over the edge." Calloway nodded, stirring his coffee. "I want that block cleared by the end of the month. Investors are lined up, and I can't afford delays." Denton smirked. "Consider it done. My guys know how to apply pressure." Olivia's fists clenched as she listened. Their casual exchange felt more like negotiating a business deal than displacing real families. "These two talk about destroying lives like they're ordering dinner," Nathan said bitterly, his eyes dark under the van's dim light. "We're catching it all," Olivia replied, glancing at him. "Let's make sure it sticks." As the conversation continued, Olivia made the call. "Move the units in." From across the street, uniformed officers approached the diner, their presence calm but decisive as they entered through the front and back exits. Inside, the undercover agents discreetly slipped out, signaling the all clear. The lead officer stepped forward. "Travis Denton, Eric Calloway, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and abuse of power." Denton's confident smirk faded instantly. Calloway's face twisted in disbelief, though he tried to protest. "There must be some misunderstanding," Calloway began, but the officers ignored him, securing the cuffs around his wrists. As both men were led out, Nathan exhaled with a satisfied grin. "We got them," he said triumphantly. Olivia allowed herself the smallest smile, but remained focused. "This is just the first step. Now we dismantle the entire network." The arrest of Denton and Calloway sent shockwaves through the precinct. The ripple effect was immediate. Other officers, once confident in their immunity, began to crack under the pressure. Facing undeniable evidence, many opted to cooperate, offering deeper insights into the corrupt structure that had thrived under Hale's leadership. Within days, Olivia's team had gathered enough information to implicate 4 additional officers directly involved in the scheme. Dana Caldwell worked alongside Olivia, building airtight cases that left no room for doubt. "This isn't just about them," Dana said, scanning through the growing files. "We're sending a message. This stops now." By the end of the week, Olivia stood in the precinct's crowded conference room, addressing the remaining officers who hadn't been implicated. The weight in the room was palpable. "This department," Olivia began, her voice clear and firm, "has been complicit in systemic abuse. That ends today." She scanned the room, meeting the gaze of each officer. "We have a responsibility, to the community, to the badge you wear, to rebuild this precinct on integrity, not exploitation. We don't just protect the law, we protect the people who rely on it." Silence filled the space, but slowly, solemn nods followed. The reality of what had happened and what lay ahead was sinking in. As the meeting concluded, Olivia stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against her skin. The arrests were a victory, but they marked the beginning of a long road. The web of corruption had been exposed, but trust wouldn't be rebuilt overnight. Nathan joined her outside the precinct, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. "You did it," he said. Olivia shook her head. "We did it. And we're not done yet." Justice wasn't a single moment. It was a process, one that required persistence and grit. As Olivia gazed at the streetlights lining the precinct, she knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over, and she was ready for whatever came next. The arrests of Travis Denton and Eric Calloway were only the beginning. As Olivia Brooks reviewed the growing investigation, it became clear that the corruption spread far deeper than anyone had anticipated. The network of misconduct implicated several high-ranking officers, some active participants, others complicit by silence. The task ahead loomed large. Olivia's team had enough to charge Denton and Calloway, but dismantling the entire corrupt structure without alarming the remaining officers required precision. A single misstep could drive them underground. Seated in a conference room at FBI headquarters, Olivia, Nathan Green, Assistant U.S. Attorney Dana Caldwell, and a select team of investigators gathered. The atmosphere was tense, but every person in the room understood the weight of what they were about to do. We've locked down Denton and Calloway, Dana began, flipping through a file. But their arrests are making waves. Some of the officers involved are starting to sweat, and that makes them dangerous. Olivia nodded. We use that to our advantage. The more nervous they get, the more likely they are to make mistakes. We need them to expose themselves. Nathan leaned forward, tapping a folder on the table. We've been monitoring communications. There's chatter about a meeting. Lieutenant Carl Decker is rallying a few of the officers involved. They're trying to regroup and figure out their next move. Olivia's eyes sharpened. Where and when? At a private warehouse outside town. Nathan replied. It's completely off the books. They think they're safe. Dana's lips curled into a faint smirk. Perfect. That's where we make our move. The operation hinged on one thing: gathering hard evidence without tipping off Decker or his crew. Olivia and Nathan worked closely with the FBI's technical team to wire the warehouse with hidden cameras and microphones. Everything has to be recorded, Olivia explained during the briefing. If things go south, we'll have backup ready, but the goal is intel, not confrontation. Dana nodded from across the table. What about Denton and Calloway? Do we use their cooperation? Olivia hesitated. Denton and Calloway had agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences, but Olivia knew their loyalty was self-serving. Not yet, Olivia said. We'll keep them in reserve. I'd rather catch the rest of them red-handed. The night of the meeting arrived swiftly. The warehouse, an aging structure surrounded by empty lots, sat quietly under dim streetlights. Its isolation made it the perfect spot for illicit gatherings. Nathan and Olivia sat in the surveillance van parked a block away, eyes fixed on the live feed streaming from the hidden cameras. Inside, Lieutenant Carl Decker stood at the head of a makeshift table, flanked by Mike Ralston and James Vickers, two officers already under quiet investigation. Their postures were tense, their hushed voices reflecting the weight of Denton's arrest. This is spiraling out of control, Decker muttered, pacing the length of the room. Denton should have kept his mouth shut. Now the feds are on us. Ralston crossed his arms. What are we supposed to do? They've got evidence. If they dig any deeper, we're all done for. Decker's eyes narrowed, glaring at him. We cover our tracks, destroy anything that links us to Calloway or those properties, and make damn sure no one breaks rank. In the van, Nathan let out a low whistle. They're unraveling. Olivia's gaze didn't waver. Good. Let them. As the meeting progressed, another voice broke through the tension. Sergeant Lisa Grady, one of the few women in the precinct's leadership. Unlike the others, her tone carried hesitation. Maybe it's time to stop, Grady said. People are getting hurt. Families displaced. Is this really worth it? Decker's eyes flared as his hand slammed against the table. Don't get soft now, Grady. You knew what this was. Grady didn't back down. I knew we were protecting the precinct, not tearing apart the community we swore to serve. In the van, Olivia's eyes flicked toward Nathan. She could be an ally, Olivia said quietly. Nathan nodded. If she's the crack in their armor, we use it. Decker, visibly frustrated, continued issuing orders. Ralston, you handle the files at the station. Vickers, destroy anything tied to the properties Denton handled directly. Grady, you're going to. Hold that thought, Olivia whispered, signaling to the backup team. A moment later, black SUVs pulled up at both entrances of the warehouse. Uniformed officers flooded in, weapons drawn but unnecessary. The surprise on Decker's face told Olivia everything she needed to know. Lieutenant Decker, one officer announced, you and your men are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. Grady stepped back voluntarily, her hands raised. Decker's jaw clenched as he glared at Olivia, who walked in calmly. You're making a mistake, Decker growled as officers secured the cuffs around his wrists. No, Olivia replied coolly. I'm fixing one. By morning, the precinct was a different place. Decker, Ralston, and Vickers were in custody, and Lisa Grady was already cooperating with the investigation. Olivia stood in the precinct's command center, addressing a room of officers who had escaped the web of corruption. This department has been complicit for too long, Olivia began. That ends today. It's time we remember why we wear these badges, to protect, not exploit. As the officers absorbed her words, Olivia stepped away, feeling the weight of progress, not completion, but the first step in rebuilding trust. Nathan approached with a rare grin. You did it. We did it, Olivia corrected. Justice wasn't complete, but Olivia Brooks wasn't stopping until every thread of corruption was unraveled. It was supposed to be about protecting the community, not tearing it apart, Sergeant Lisa Grady said, her voice cutting through the tension in the warehouse. The room fell quiet. In the surveillance van parked outside, Olivia Brooks leaned forward, watching the live feed. Her instincts told her Grady might be the wedge needed to fracture the group. "We need to bring her in," Olivia said quietly to Nathan Green. "She could be the key to breaking this wide open." Nathan nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I'll keep an eye on her after this." Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere boiled over. Lieutenant Carl Decker wasn't about to lose control. His voice sharpened as he barked orders. "Burn the files," Decker said, his tone cold and decisive. "And if anyone asks questions, you know the drill. Nobody talks to the feds. Got it?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances but nodded reluctantly. Their fear had eclipsed whatever shred of morality remained. Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Now," she ordered. Within seconds, the perimeter around the warehouse swarmed with FBI agents and local law enforcement. Officers flooded in through every entrance. The officers inside barely had time to react. Decker's eyes widened in fury as he found himself staring down the barrel of reality. "You won't get away with this," Decker snarled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Olivia stepped into the room, her presence unwavering. "You already did," she replied coolly, "and now it's over." The raid uncovered far more than just guilty officers. Laptops, hard drives, and stacks of incriminating files filled the evidence lockers back at headquarters. As the data poured in, the scale of corruption became clearer. The precinct hadn't just turned a blind eye. It had become a breeding ground for intimidation and exploitation. Later that evening, Olivia and Dana Caldwell sat together in the FBI's evidence room, reviewing the footage from the sting. They incriminated themselves at every turn, Dana said, pausing the video as Decker's orders echoed back through the speakers. This footage alone could secure convictions. Olivia's eyes remained on the screen, watching Lisa Grady's hesitant expression. "She's not like the others," Olivia said. "We need to bring her in." Dana nodded. "If she testifies, it'll solidify everything." The next day, Lisa Grady sat across from Olivia in a quiet interrogation room. Her posture was tense, but there was a flicker of resolve in her eyes. "I didn't sign up for this," Grady said, her voice low but steady. "I became a cop to help people, not to tear down families for profit." Olivia nodded, leaning forward slightly. "We believe you, Lisa, and we're here to help you do the right thing." Grady swallowed hard, the weight of the moment settling around her. "If I testify, I'll lose everything." Olivia's tone softened. "You'll save more than you lose. Your testimony could stop this and help rebuild what's been broken." A long silence stretched between them. Then, with a deep breath, Grady met Olivia's gaze. "I'll tell you everything I know." For several hours, Lisa Grady sat in the interrogation room, detailing the inner workings of the corrupt network. She spoke carefully but thoroughly, describing how Lieutenant Carl Decker and Travis Denton had manipulated younger officers. They used intimidation, false promises of career advancement, and protection to ensure loyalty and compliance. Grady revealed key information about Eric Calloway's involvement, outlining the specifics of bribes and the families targeted for forced displacement. Her testimony filled critical gaps in the investigation, painting a comprehensive picture of the entire operation. Olivia Brooks and Nathan Green listened intently, knowing this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. "This is a gold mine," Nathan said as Grady left the room, escorted under protection. Olivia nodded. "It gives us a roadmap to dismantle the rest of the operation." While the legal case solidified behind closed doors, the public's attention stayed firmly fixed on the scandal. News outlets covered the corruption in depth, highlighting the bravery of the families who had come forward and the mounting evidence against the officers involved. Community leaders organized rallies and town hall meetings, demanding deeper reforms and more accountability within the precinct. Olivia was invited to one such meeting by local activists. They saw her as a symbol of hope, a figure willing to stand against the corruption plaguing their neighborhoods. Standing before a packed room, Olivia's voice echoed with conviction. "This isn't about a few bad actors," she told the crowd. "It's about dismantling the systems that allowed them to thrive." Change doesn't come easily, but it starts with us, demanding better for our families, our neighbors, and our communities. The applause was thunderous, but Olivia knew the real work wasn't in speeches or headlines. It was in the hours spent behind the scenes, building the case piece by piece. As the investigation advanced, the case against Decker, Denton, and Calloway grew stronger. Dana Caldwell, relentless as ever, spearheaded the prosecution. Every element of the case was carefully aligned. There would be no room for loopholes or technicalities. This trial is going to draw national attention. Dana said during a late-night briefing, "We can't afford mistakes." Olivia and Nathan spent long nights ensuring every document, recording, and witness statement was ironclad. The video footage from the warehouse sting, Grady's testimony, and financial records tying Calloway to legal transactions created a damning narrative. When the trial began, it was nothing short of a spectacle. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, community members, and activists who had followed the case from the start. The prosecution's opening arguments were precise and unrelenting. Witnesses, including displaced families, testified about the harassment and intimidation they had endured at the hands of Denton's crew. Lisa Grady's testimony became the trial's emotional anchor. Facing her former colleagues, Grady spoke with unwavering honesty, detailing how she had been coerced into the corruption. Her willingness to take responsibility for her role struck a chord, adding gravity to her words. "I made mistakes," Grady admitted during cross-examination, "but I'm here to make them right, and I won't let these men destroy any more lives." Her testimony resonated with the jury. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all charges. Carl Decker, Travis Denton, and Eric Calloway were convicted of conspiracy, bribery, and abuse of power. Their sentencing was severe, reflecting not just the harm they had inflicted, but the breach of public trust. As the verdict was read aloud, Olivia felt a rare moment of relief. Justice, at least in part, had been served. But Olivia knew the fight wasn't over. The convictions were a victory, but they were only one step in dismantling systemic corruption. The fallout from the trial prompted widespread reforms within the precinct. Policies were introduced to increase transparency and accountability, including mandatory body cameras, independent oversight committees, and stricter protocols for handling misconduct complaints. Olivia played a crucial role in shaping these reforms. Drawing from her experience, she worked closely with community leaders and law enforcement officials to ensure meaningful, lasting change. A full precinct overhaul followed. New leadership emerged, and a renewed commitment to community trust became the cornerstone of the department's rebuilding process. For the first time in years, residents began to feel hope, real hope, in their law enforcement. One evening, as Olivia sat alone in her office, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the victims who had come forward with courage, the officers who had chosen integrity over silence, and the community that had fought alongside them. Her phone buzzed. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. "Big day," he said when she answered. Olivia smiled softly. Yeah, it was. She stared out the window, watching the city lights flicker across the streets she had worked so hard to protect. There was still more to do. There always would be. But for the first time, Olivia felt they were winning. As Olivia Brooks sat alone in her office late that evening, she thumbed through the final report on the case. The folder felt heavier than it should, filled with names, dates, and the scars of a community that had endured far too much. The journey had been painful and transformative. But as Olivia read through the neatly typed pages, she knew every battle had been worth it. This wasn't just about taking down corrupt officers. It was about laying the foundation for a better future, one step at a time. The sun dipped below the skyline as Olivia entered the newly renovated conference room at the Eastbridge precinct. What was once a dim, neglected space had been transformed. Bright, open, and modern, it was a reflection of the changes the community had fought for. Tonight marked the inaugural meeting of the precinct's Community Oversight Board, a cornerstone of the reforms Olivia and her team had pushed forward. The room filled with a mix of community leaders, officers, and activists, all brought together by a shared goal of lasting accountability. Standing at the podium, Olivia's calm yet commanding presence anchored the room. She glanced at familiar faces, the the very people whose voices had driven this movement. She began to speak, her voice steady and clear. "Today marks the start of a new chapter for this precinct, and for our community," Olivia said. "We've confronted difficult truths, held those responsible accountable, and taken steps toward rebuilding trust. But this is just the beginning. Justice isn't a destination. It's a journey that requires all of us to stay vigilant." Soft applause echoed around the room. Olivia could see the nods of quiet agreement, but she knew the weight of the past still lingered in many hearts. Among the crowd, Olivia recognized the faces of families who had been displaced by the corruption, people who had suffered but still found the strength to stand tall. There were officers, too, men and women who had chosen integrity over silence, who had risked their careers to do what was right. And there was her team, standing at the edges of the room, quietly reflecting on how far they had come. Nathan Green approached as the meeting concluded, holding out a cup of coffee. His usual easy demeanor was laced with pride. "You pulled it off," he said, handing her the cup. "Not just arrests, not just a trial, but something real." Olivia smiled, accepting the drink. "We pulled it off," she corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you or Dana or the community." Nathan chuckled. "Still, you were the one driving this forward. You took the worst situation and made it count." Olivia looked around the room, her gaze softening as she saw community members mingling, exchanging ideas. "It's not about me," she said quietly. "It's about them, the families who were forced out, the people who refused to stay silent. This is their victory as much as ours." As Olivia finished speaking, Margaret Johnson approached. The Johnsons had been one of the first families to come forward, detailing how Denton and his officers had harassed them until they had no choice but to sell their home. "Chief Brooks," Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I just wanted to thank you for listening, for fighting for us. It means more than you know." Olivia took Margaret's hand, shaking it firmly. "You're the reason this happened," Olivia replied. "Your courage in coming forward set everything in motion. Never forget how powerful your voice is." As the Johnson family left, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their stories, their pain, had fueled this fight, and Olivia knew that as long as people like the Johnsons existed, she couldn't stop now. Back at FBI headquarters the next day, Olivia sat with Dana and Nathan in the briefing room, reviewing what came next. "The trial's success has sparked national attention," Dana said, flipping through a thick file. "Other precincts are reaching out, wanting to know how we did this. They want to implement similar reforms." Nathan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Feels like we cracked something open. Now everyone's looking to rebuild." Olivia nodded, tapping the table lightly. "This can't stop with us," she said. "We share what we've learned. Create frameworks other precincts can use. If we can show this works, maybe it becomes the new standard." Nathan smirked. "You're starting to sound like you're ready to take on the entire system." Olivia met his gaze with a small, determined smile. "Maybe I am," she said, "one precinct at a time." The ripple effect of the trial stretched far beyond Eastbridge. News of the convictions and sweeping reforms gained national attention. Community leaders and precincts across the country began reaching out, eager to learn how to implement similar changes in their own cities. In the FBI conference room, Olivia Brooks sat across from Dana Caldwell, who leaned back thoughtfully in her chair. "We've set a precedent here," Dana said, tapping her pen against the table. "But there's still so much work ahead. Corruption like this doesn't operate in isolation." Olivia nodded. "We need to build on this momentum, share what we've learned. If we can create frameworks other precincts can adapt, this won't just fix one department. It could start transforming the entire system." Nathan Green, leaning casually against the doorway, grinned. "Sounds like you're ready to take on the whole country, Olivia." She smiled, shaking her head lightly. "One step at a time." That evening, Olivia returned to her apartment, grateful for a rare moment of quiet. The city outside her window hummed with life, but the weight she usually carried felt lighter. Sitting by the window, she thought back to how this all began. A simple traffic stop that exposed a much deeper rot. She remembered the frustration of facing Denton that night, the humiliation that had simmered beneath her calm facade. But she also remembered the determination it sparked, the refusal to stay silent. Reaching for her worn leather journal, Olivia let her thoughts flow. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. It's about making things right, not just for ourselves, but for those who come after us. The fight isn't over, but today we moved forward, and that gives me hope. The next morning, Olivia rose early, ready to face the day. Meetings, reports, and new initiatives filled her schedule, but as she stood in front of the mirror adjusting her suit, she allowed herself to feel proud. This wasn't just a personal victory. It belonged to the community, to those who had once been voiceless, and to the countless people who had suffered under the weight of corruption. As Olivia stepped onto the bustling streets, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The fight for justice was never ending. But for the first time in years, Olivia Brooks felt like they were winning.